43% of our day is made up of habits.
Oh,
so
wow,
like it is, yeah. And it's such a huge proportion of our day. That's at least 43% of our day. So it's your routine, not your willpower that matters. And a lot of people miss that. I like to say, it's skill power, not willpower, that creates change.
You're tuned in to the Dr. Kinney Show, and I'm your host, Dr. Erin Kinney, a naturopathic doctor and speaker dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of your body and guiding you back into balance. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Kinney Show. This week, joining us, we have Dr. Heather McKee, who is a health behavioral change specialist. And we are going to have a chat about all things habits. And I'm really excited because what your habits are will end up being what your body is. And we'll talk more about this, but your habits are so important. So Heather, thank you so much for being here. I cannot wait to have this conversation. It's awesome to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Erin. Yeah, no, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So maybe we can start, as I start all my shows, can you start and just kind of share your story and how did you become a health behavioral change specialist?
Yeah. Good question. It definitely wasn't a straight career. It was definitely a squiggly career,
yes,
if you will. But I was always interested in health. And back in the day, health was more about sport and sports psychology and all of those things. But I started out with a degree in sports science. And it was when I was there, I was working in a metabolic syndrome clinic. So for people with diabetes and different metabolic syndromes, and we had the most amazing set of personal trainers. We had specific nutritionists. We had all these plans, and yet people couldn't make it stick. And it was incredibly frustrating because we had, all of the experts there. And I just couldn't let this go. I was like, I don't understand. If we've got all the perfect pieces in place, all the perfect ingredients, why can't we make change happen? And so I sat down with all 60 participants in the clinic and just asked them why. What's going on? What's holding you back? What's getting in the way? And that's when the story started to flow out. That's when I started to understand more about what drove people to change or what was holding them back. And that kind of then spurred me on. It was like the spark that ignited the behavior change flame. So I went on to do a master's in physical activity and health psychology, and then a PhD in the psychology of weight loss and how to lose weight without dieting, and ultimately how to create those habits that last. So I'm a massive geek on all things habits.
Yeah,
and I think
like it. You've got like all the credentials. I love it.
No, I just like, what? I'm so curious about human behavior and what drives people, and especially when it comes to health behaviors, because I feel like so often we feel like health has to be just another stick we beat ourselves with, rather than something that can be quite, joyful and actually benefit and add to our life rather than take away. And I think that's really my passion and purpose, is to help people find their joy in their healthy habits.
Yeah, that's super cool. Well, then maybe let's jump right. Maybe, do you have a definition of habit? Is that like
gosh, yeah.
Well,
I don't. I have not come up with this definition, but I think the best way to think about habits is that they're formed through something called context-dependent repetition, which means do the same thing in the same circumstance enough times, and it becomes a habit. So, and they're kind of formed across the loop. So you've got a cue or a trigger for action, you've got a behavior, and then you've got a reward. So a cue or trigger might be you get into your car, you put on your seatbelt is the behavior, and the reward is, safety. Or you walk into the bathroom in the morning and you see your toothbrush, which is the cue or the trigger. And the routine is brushing your teeth, and the reward is positive dental hygiene. Or something that we might all know is you get stuck on a boring project with work. You get tempted to scroll social media or go in news websites, and the reward is a break in your procrastination. So the more you repeat a habit in a given context, helpful or unhelpful, the more that you neurologically wire it into your brain, and the more likely it is that then you will do it. And non-consciously means without thinking. So you'll just do it automatically.
Automatic. I love that. I feel like when my brain's on autopilot and I get in the car and I'm supposed to be driving, somewhere new, and I automatically drive to my kid's school, or automatically drive to work, and I'm like, wait, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be somewhere else. So like sometimes you do things out of auto, like it's become a habit. You just do it because that's what's ingrained, whether it's good or bad. And so the idea is, how do we figure out how to make the things that we want to be habits become a habit, right?
Yeah. And that's the real crux for a lot of people. And the interesting thing is, that like 43% of our day is made up of habits.
Oh,
so
wow,
like and it's such a huge proportion of our day. That's at least 43% of our day. So it's your routine, not your willpower, that matters. And a lot of people miss that. And especially when it comes to, you know, creating a health change or adopting new changes, you know, we feel like we need to white knuckle our way to success. So we need to kind of control our way to success. But ultimately, actually, the opposite is true. And it's quite interesting because we do overly rely on willpower to see us through, to create habits. But actually, willpower isn't ultimately what creates habits. I like to say, you know, it's skill power, not willpower, that creates change. And the thing is, willpower is like a muscle. So the more we exercise it, you know, like New Year comes around and we're like, right, I'm going to give up sugar. I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm going to be nice to my kids all the time. I'm never going to lose my temper. You know, we add all the things in. The more we take away from our focal goal and the more we use up our willpower. And willpower needs rest and recovery. And ultimately what we want to rely on is our skill power. And, you know, there's a certain amount of skills that go into creating long-term habits, but it's not about just willpowering your way and resisting temptation. That's not going to actually get you to success. What's going to get you to success is actually working in a compassionate way, working to create smaller changes, working to find those habits that you enjoy, and actually making the process in itself more easy, more enjoyable, and more fluid than actually just forcing ourselves into change. But, you know, we all do it. Like, you know, think about when you join a gym. Yeah. You look on the gym floor and you're like, right, I'm going to actually start with the Stairmaster because that's most punishing and that's just going to be hard.
And then
or
it doesn't feel good. And then you don't come back because you're like, oh man, I'm sore. I didn't enjoy that.
Yeah, exactly. Or we go to the store and we buy, you know, really bland, boring foods. And we're like, well, if I eat these just for long enough, eventually I'm just going to start to enjoy them, you know? And that's the problem is we come at it things in the wrong way. And ultimately that affects our ability to stick with our habits. And that's why so many of us find 6 to 12 weeks into a health kick that we tend to wander off. And actually we're more likely to give in to temptation and we're more likely to default back to our old unhelpful habits.
So is it because we're not giving ourselves the proper, you explained that like triangle of like, you know, the stimulus or whatever it was, then the habit and then the reward is because we're not like having a good enough reward to like recreate a circuit, or what is it? Like, is that where it is? Like we're not, the change that we're trying to make doesn't give us enough joy or enough reward. So we do it for 6 weeks and then we fall off because we're trying to find the thing that did give us something that had joy or a better reward. Is that where?
Yeah. Great question. And the answer is kind of threefold. Okay. But I'll start with the first bit. Often we start out in a habit kick for the wrong reasons. So we'll want to change because, you know, our doctor told us, or, and that reason alone, or we want a particular number on the scales or a number on our paychecks or a finish time in the race. And the thing is, we haven't actually adopted those habits as intrinsic habits for us. We're just doing it because someone told us to do it rather than actually because we want it truly for ourselves. And that type of motivation is called extrinsic motivation. And I call that slippy motivation because, you know, when you reach those goals or you get to that point, often that's when you put yourself under pressure to then step it up. Or if you don't reach those goals, you kind of get disillusioned with it and think, oh, what's this all for? And you tend to just, you know, throw in the towel quite easily. And that's because, you know, goals that are performed for performance or appearance or numbers based reasons, they just don't last. And the literature shows that time and time again. Whereas on the flip side, goals that are formed for intrinsic or personal reasons, and intrinsic is a lovely translation into Latin. It's inward or goods for your soul. So those goals that are formed because you understand the contribution that health makes in your life. You understand that what actually following that habit gives you back. You understand the why behind it. You understand what it actually adds to your life, how it makes you feel, how it makes you show up better at work, how it makes you show up better with your children, how it actually makes you feel more confident and competent in your day-to-day life. As soon as you can start to see what a habit gives you back, what it adds to your life, that's when you're really kind of tapping into intrinsic motivation. But where people trip themselves up is they say, right, my goal is to walk 10,000 steps on my fitness tracker a day. Instead of, and if you ask that person, why is that important to you? Oh, well, I want to have more energy. I want to get fitter. Why is that important to you? Oh, well, I want to, have the energy at the end of the day to be able to give myself to my kids and my partner or my community or whatever it is. And if you ask why enough, you can get that intrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
But people don't keep that as salient or as obvious as it needs to be. And we really need to connect with why. And I always say, if you can find your why, you can find your way. And, finding your why is the kind of key first step in anyone's habit change journey.
Yeah, this is such an interesting conversation, because from my perspective as a practitioner, people come to me and they're like, I want X, Y, Z. And then sometimes when it doesn't happen, because they didn't do this is making so much sense. So I need to ask more questions about their why. This is great. I'm learning so much. This is awesome. It's very clear when people come in and they already know their why, they tend to the habit will stick and they will, and I'm thinking about this in my own life. I'm like, I think also if you're doing or creating a habit that when you do it, you feel good, you're going to do it more.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And actually, if we can tune into that good feeling. So instead of lying in bed, weighing up the pros and cons of going for a run, if you start to think about, how am I going to feel when I come back in that door? What's the achievement, different sense of achievement or clarity or freshness? How is that going to feel? That can actually make us more likely to engage, because we're looking for that reward, exactly like you said.
And if you celebrate and remember what the reward is, and I had a conversation with a patient last week and we were talking about her morning routine, and she was doing all of the things that I think there were extrinsic motivations. She's like, well, I journal and I check that off, and I meditate and I check that off. And I was like, do you enjoy it? And she's like, well, no, I do it because that's what you're supposed to do. So she was doing these, but then it was like a negative, she wasn't getting that positive feedback loop for about 4 weeks. And I'm curious to see if she'll keep doing it. If you're just checking it off the list, whatever your habit is, and there's what would you say to that? Like, if you're doing something just to have it on the checklist, that doesn't seem to be fulfilling an intrinsic why.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is something that I see so often, and change is already hard, but it's even harder if you're being hard on yourself about it or doing things that are really difficult. And it's quite funny because, when it comes to children, we make change fun. So if we make health fun even, we bring them to the playground if you want them to exercise, we play games, we make their vegetables into the shape of dinosaurs to make it fun. But when it comes
eat the veggies, but then for us, we don't do that.
No, we just think about the boring Stairmaster, or we pound the pavement because it's the only way to get healthy. And I always say to people, it's actually a really interesting study where they got 2 groups of women to start walking habits. And one of those groups, they said to go out and walk for exercise and for the benefits it's going to give them. And another group, they said, go out and walk for fun. Go and enjoy it as much as you can. And when they followed up with them 3 months later, the walking for fun group was much more adherent.
Oh, I'm sure.
The tricky researchers, and this is why psychology research is always so funny, is when the participants had to come and fill out these psychometric questionnaires. So, fill out how they'd gotten on and all these psychological measures. The researchers had left bowls of M&Ms right next to the questionnaires. And what was quite interesting is at the end of the study, they saw that actually those that walked for benefit or for exercise ate twice as many M&Ms as those that walked for fun. And they hypothesized that was due to the feelings of deprivation and the feelings that they had to actually force themselves into change. And change was harder for them. It was a more difficult process and a less joyful process, that they overcompensated and rebelled in other ways. And I'm sure we all
think about that when you go on a diet. You're like, I'm going to be super strict and I'm going to not eat this and I'm going to cut my calories and I'm going to work out. And then afterwards you end up you fall, and you don't just fall off, you really fall off, and you go and you eat all the things and drink all the, that's so interesting.
Because of the restriction you placed yourself on. Whereas if we start to think about, what brings us joy, I always say to people, if you're starting out a health kick, start with a joy list. Ask yourself, what are those healthy habits I enjoy? Can I start with those? And like you said, Aaron, how can I tune in to the enjoyment I get from my existing healthy habits? Or even how can I layer joy onto my existing healthy habits? So say you find like batch cooking monotonously boring. Can you do it while watching your favorite streaming show? Or listening to your favorite podcast?
I will only cook when I watch a show. I don't watch much TV, but if I'm going to, I'm like, all right, I'm going to cook and do this at the same time because then I'm like, okay, I'll enjoy this while I'm watching something or listening to something or a book or.
Yeah. And that like, it just makes it more tempting, more enticing to do it. It's actually a concept called temptation bundling. So, and especially if you only do that thing when you're doing, your food prep or whatever, then it's like, oh, but I really want to watch the show. Okay, well, I need to have some food prep in order to be able to do it.
Yeah, I do all of my household chores. I listen to audiobooks, but only like self-help. And I love self-help books. I won't read them. I will only do them when I do chores that I don't like to do, like laundry or putting away the dishes. So I'm like, oh, I can't wait to read that next chapter. And I'm like, oh, but I got to go do that. So I try to pair those together. I didn't know there was a name for that.
Love it.
Yeah.
You're doing more things right than you realize.
Yeah. I should be celebrating that.
Yeah. And I think that there's two questions for people to ask themselves. So why is it important for me to create this change? And that's something that, you can ask your patients as well. And then the second question is, how can I find joy in my healthy habits? Or what are those healthy habits that I actually enjoy? And would I actually rather do those than the ones that I'm doing that is existing?
Yeah.
Because the easier you make them, and the more fun you make them, the more like you're going to repeat them. And if we go back to the definition of a habit, habits happen in context-dependent repetition. The more you repeat something, the more likely it is that it's going to become a habit.
It becomes something you do automatically.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned something there, Erin, which I thought was really important, which was about little wins as well.
Yes.
And then that kind of plays into dopamine response.
Yes.
And so the thing is, when we're thinking about habits and we're thinking about how we normally treat ourselves, and we're always saying, oh, well, I only went for a 20-minute run, or I only did X, or I only ate healthy for half the day. That's not making us feel good. That's actually making us feel bad. And it's telling our brain, this isn't something I want to repeat.
Yeah. Whereas if you didn't do a good job, which also puts you in stress mode. And we don't need to do that. We don't need to beat yourself up and activate your fight flight response at the end of the day.
Absolutely. You couldn't be more correct. And this is what we do. We all have that kind of inner self-talk, that says you're not enough. You haven't done enough. There could be more to do. This was a poor effort, whatever it happens to be for you. But the thing is, that's not going to activate the dopamine response. Yeah. What's going to activate the dopamine response is to be like, you know what? I meditated for 3 minutes. I showed up this morning.
Yeah.
I went for that run, and maybe I didn't go for 30 minutes, but I went for 20, and that's 20 more than zero.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just like it's like half full or half empty with the glass. Like you just always want to look at it half full.
Yeah. And that's not to just like put rose tinted glasses on and decide, everything is rosy. It's actually because there's a physiological response. So if you feel good after you execute a habit, even if it's as simple as drinking a glass of water, that activates the dopamine response. Dopamine is a learning hormone. It's a pat on the back. It tells yourself, well done, let's do this again. And it feels good. And we gravitate towards reward. We gravitate towards things that feel good. So next time you carry out your habit that you're trying to create, if you want to fast track it, make yourself feel good immediately afterwards. And there's a researcher that looks at this. His name is BJ Fogg. And he talks about creating this feeling of shine.
Yeah.
And shine is like a positive feeling on demand. And he says you can do it through singing a happy song after you complete your habit, or high-fiving someone, or I like to do like a drum roll on my desk, or a smiley face on my to-do list, or just something that actually
gives you like
your brain and thinking,
or something. You know what? You're like, oh, I
followed through.
Yeah,
exactly. And that just helps. And because change is created through positive emotion. And the thing is, we white knuckle our way to change through negative emotion, and it's not effective. And we wonder why we keep slipping up. And actually it's because we need to create more joy in our lives.
Such a good point. At the end of every day, and I learned this through a program that I did called Energy for Success. And they have you write down your wins at the end. So I always write wins. So it's like a triple win, like win for me, win for someone else, win for the universe. And I just list, and usually it's like I meditated this morning. I walked my dog. It's like all the things that I've done that have taken care of myself, or they might be wins, like, oh, this happened or this cool thing happened, and I try at the end of every day, right before I go to sleep. It's the last thing that I do so that I try to go to bed with positives in my brain. And sometimes the things that I write down are like things that I don't love doing, but I'm trying to get them into my habits. So I'm like, okay, well, I did that again today. Good job. You did it. You did that thing you didn't like to do. And
I love that example because thoughts are habits too.
Yes.
And repetitive thoughts are repetitive habits. And so you're actually training your brain to think and search out the positive, to look for cues to tell yourself that you're doing a good job. And that's going to ultimately actually take you out of that fight or flight mode and into, that beautiful, nourishing way of thinking that's actually really self-supportive and encouraging towards your goals. And as they've shown in goal science time and time again, those that are positively encouraging, those are the most self-compassionate, less likely to procrastinate, less likely to go off track, more likely to engage time and time and time again with their health goals or habits. So if you think that criticizing your way to success is what's going to work for you, it's time to understand that the science says the opposite. And it's time to start letting go of that and actually finding more things that you enjoy.
Yeah. And I feel like we've touched on this topic in a lot of different episodes from a lot of different angles. Like I've had people come and we've talked about, when you have one thought, you create a neuro connection, and every time you have it again, the brain will myelinate that connection. And every time we myelinate it, that makes it happen faster. So we've talked about this from a lot of different, but at the end of the day, it's like positive thoughts do end up making positive changes in the physical body, which is, I don't know, it's just so crazy and so cool. And I was going to ask you next, after I got on my I'm just always amazed at how cool the human body is. And just when you start to practice, like when you do get a good habit and it does, start to become something automatic, how it's amazing what changes you will see in the body and, diseases getting reversed and people feeling better. But it takes something becoming a habit when we're looking at lifestyle things, when we're looking at diet changes or drinking more water or exercise or the thought stuff that we've talked about. How long, from your perspective, does it really take, we're doing something, like how long does it take for something to become a habit?
Yeah, great
Because I've
question.
heard a lot of different numbers and I feel like I'm still a little unclear on what's the actual timeline?
I know. And it's not what we think. So, we've all been told 21 days or 28 days or, and actually that stuff is really interesting because that comes from research from the 60s. So there was a plastic surgeon called Maxwell Maltz. And it was his book, Psycho-Cybernetics, he looked at behaviors of his patients post-surgery. And normally it took about 21 days for them to adapt to their new appearance after surgery. And somehow that got taken up about how long that takes to create a change in behavior. But more recently, in University College London, they looked at what was the time it takes to get to automaticity. So you're doing something automatically, you're like tying your shoelaces or making a cup of coffee, you're not thinking about it. And they found it takes anything from 18 to 254 days to get
that sounds about more likely.
But it's interesting because it depends on how complex the habits were. So easier habits like, drinking an extra glass of water were formed quicker than more complex habits like going to the gym that require a couple of steps. But when you think about it, I always say to people, think about a habit that we all have. How many of us forgot to brush our teeth this morning? We didn't because it's a habit that we have. We didn't lie in bed, weighing up the pros and cons of dental hygiene or deciding if we're in the zone of toothbrushing or we're motivated enough to brush our teeth. We
just do it. You just brush your teeth because
and it's what we do. And it's not like we just brush our teeth in January as well. And our dental hygiene is done for the rest of the year. If we're no longer following it, it's a habit. But if we go back to, and any parents will resonate with this, how long did it take us to develop that toothbrushing habit? It might have taken years and years of our parents nagging us of our toothbrushing or
Yes.
But ultimately, some of the techniques we talked about today will fast track that so you don't have to wait years. But if you're no longer following something, it's no longer a habit. And so the thing is, I always say to people, do you know what? Forget about how long it takes. Because if you form a habit that lasts for life, it doesn't matter if it takes 18 or 118 days. If it's a habit for life, then it's going to stick with you.
That's such a good point. Because if you're having your head, it's going to take me 21 days, then your brain is already thinking we're going to stop this at 21 days.
Yeah, there's a finish line.
Yeah, so there shouldn't be a finish line. I should feel like this is my habit. Oh, that's a great point.
But we do that, and that puts us under unnecessary pressure, and it's unfair. And the reason is because actually at the start of the habit journey, you want to be experimenting. You want to be looking at, well, how long do I want to do this for? How long is actually achievable? How long is repeatable for me? So instead of saying, oh, well, I have to run for 30 minutes, it might be that you just run for 3, to start out with, because that's actually how you're going to create that consistency and show up. And often you'll find, and there's a really funny study on this, Darren, where they actually got people choose flossing habits. It's something that a lot of people struggle with. And they got one group to go out and floss their teeth every night, and they followed up in 3 months. And the other group, they said, just floss one tooth and we'll follow up in 3 months. And so I can see you smiling already. And I like to say, if it doesn't pass the giggle test, it's not easy enough.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it was. And those people that flossed just one tooth a night were the most consistent flossers. And they didn't just floss one. They
ended up flossing more, right?
One.
Yeah.
And it's showing up. That's the hard part. It's actually just getting to that initiation. It's getting from that intention to that action. That's hard. And if we set ourselves these monumental goals, like we have to do 45 minutes or do 60 minutes, we have to go to the gym every day because that's the only way to be healthy. That's actually unsustainable. Whereas doing the opposite, where it's laughably small, where it's almost like a joke, actually helps you show up, helps tell your brain you've done well. So say you're starting a meditation habit. If you sit for 1 minute or even just while the kettle boils and starts to meditate, instead of telling yourself you have to do 10, you'll feel like every extra minute is a win.
Oh, yeah.
And that will help you create that dopamine response.
Yeah.
And so that's really, really important that we think about those small changes, because they're what accumulate, they're what compound over time. And ultimately, those small changes, they lead to sticky habits. They lead to big results over time.
Yeah. I love that you brought up that one with meditation, because that's, and I always like to liken meditation to, most people in their adult life, they know what it's like to have gotten into shape at some point. Like they've gone to the gym, they've gotten into a habit of that. They know what it's like to go from being out of shape to getting into shape. And like the first few times you go to the gym, it doesn't feel good. And you lay in bed, you're like weighing the pros and the cons. And you're like, when you're developing that habit, but after a while, if you're someone who has developed an exercise habit, you remember, like, it feels good. So I'm going to go to the gym because I feel good. I feel better. And meditation is the same thing. The first few times you do it, it might not feel that great, or it might feel different, or your brain might go places and I'm like, you have to keep doing it. And at some point there will become a point where you're like, you know what? I actually felt really good for those 3 minutes where my brain wasn't racing. I was just focused on the one thing. I wasn't doing 50 million things at once. And once your brain makes that, I think this is what you're talking about. Once the brain makes the positive association with, wow, I felt good while I was meditating, you're much more likely to be like, tomorrow I'm going to meditate for 5 minutes. Like, you're going to increase the time because you know that it feels good.
And I love that connection that you've made there. And just and even to layer on to that is, well, maybe, the meditation wasn't working for you because you chose the wrong time of day. Maybe you're trying to get the kids out the door at that time and it was stressful. And that's what people do. They say, oh, meditation doesn't work for me because I've only tried this one type of meditation in this one way at this one particular time. And that's it. It doesn't work. Rather than I say, see your first 21 days, instead of trying to get to a habit in 21 days, use it as your experimentation time. What time of day works? What method works for me? How many minutes works for me? What intensity works for me? And just play around with that and use it as a way to learn about yourself and learn what works for you.
Well, this is kind of, I think, when you were talking about what are the healthy habits, and this could be either applied to just about what are the meditation types or kind of day that you like, but what are the habits or the things that bring you joy? I think I sometimes say to my patients, I'm like, okay, we need to find something for you to do every day that calms your nervous system down. And I'll give them a list. I'm like, that could be listening to music. That could be gardening. That could be sitting outside. That could be sitting with your cup of coffee and a journal or a Bible or prayer, and I give them a whole list. And I'm like, for the next 3 weeks until we get your labs back, I want you to try these out and see which one feels the best to you. And when we find the one that you like, then we will try to get that into your everyday life. Because again, if a doctor tells you, I want you to do X, Y, Z, and that's not what resonates with you, it's going to be, like you said, an extrinsic, what was it, goal or motivator? That's not your
intrinsic motivation. And
motivation,
you're going to feel bad on yourself.
Yeah, you're going to feel, exactly. You'll be like, oh, they told me to do it and I didn't do it. And then you've got that negative feedback loop. But
if you start to connect that, you start to think, oh, it's me. And I like to say, if you're struggling to change your habits, it's not you, it's your method. And if you have a better method for change, then change can happen. But people blame themselves. They say, oh, I've got poor willpower. Let me tell you right now, everyone has poor willpower.
Yeah.
But the people that are most successful are people that follow a method rather than relying on their unreliable willpower. And by a method, I mean intrinsic goals. I mean, finding your joy. I mean, making small changes. I mean, experimenting. All of those things are the method in the recipe for health. So rather than relying on ingredients like Beyonce's latest diet, or, you know, coconut oil is going to be the one thing that changes everything for me, or the next, you know,
the next extrinsic thing, essentially.
The next Thai master, or whatever the next latest craze is, you know, you're actually relying on a method in the recipe for health. So how to take the ingredients that work for you and apply them to your life. And that's a piece that people miss. And that's that's behavioral science. So people just they miss how to take the things and apply them to your lives, and they don't give themselves enough space and time to learn how it works for them.
Yeah. Well, this is making me think that anyone who's listening who's like, oh my gosh, I've tried this, instead of being like, instead of feeling bad about none of that working, it's literally like, wait, you've learned what didn't work. So you've spent a lot of your time and you've learned what didn't. So that's learning. So that means like, great, okay, that didn't work. So let's try something else. Right? Like you could spin it in a way that like looks like, and I think, you know, dieting is something, or people in weight loss journeys is something that comes up a lot. I get a lot of people that come into the practice like, hey, I'm wanting to lose weight. And they'll tell me all the things they've tried that didn't work, and they're frustrated. But I think if you start to spin we tried these things and that wasn't the way that kept a habit for you. So maybe we can learn that wasn't the right way and try to find a different way. There's always a good way to positive spin it.
Yeah, and not even as well to make people feel frustrated because we're like being like, oh, well, all your failures are great. But when we did a study on successful weight loss and maintenance, and we looked at people who had lost a clinically significant amount of weight and had regained it then again in the next 1 to 5 years. And then we looked at people who had actually maintained it beyond the 5 years. And ultimately, one of the main conclusions of our study was that failure is success if you learn from it. And those that were successful at maintaining long term were able to look at their failures as insights and little hints and nudges to help them understand what works best for them. Yeah. And rather than associate their failures with a personal failing as them, thinking that they're a bad person, or, they're making themselves feel morally wrong in some way because they gave in to temptation, they looked at them more objectively and said, well, actually, I left myself too hungry in that situation, or I gave myself too much to do there, or that was a stressful week. And actually, I put myself under too much pressure. And those are the people that were successful. They were the people that had that bounce back ability. They were the people that were able to separate themselves from the method and actually see where they could make changes over time.
Well, and that I'm sure is applicable not just to weight loss, but anything in life, in your career or in, right? Like if you're able to see your failure, I feel like isn't quite the right word, but if you're able to look at your failure, because failure has this negative connotation, but if you're able to look at something that didn't work out the way you wanted it as a way of a learning opportunity, be like, okay, well, that didn't work. And now who is it? I feel like there's like the Thomas Edison story. Like how many times did he try to make the light bulb? And he just kept doing and kept going and kept going and kept going. But we don't look at him as a failure, right? We look at that as like, he invented the light bulb, but he must have tried thousands of times, but and he clearly, I don't know what went on in his head, but he must have not beaten himself up about it because he kept trying, right?
And he believed in himself in a way.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm going to try, iterate, fail until I get to that point.
Yeah. And I think that's what I think what it sounds like is the really discerning thing here is to not be upset at yourself, to just be upset at the method or the so it's so that you aren't wrong. Because I think that's where a lot of us get stuck, especially when it comes to our own health. Like I'm the bad guy. And then again, we're in that cycle of beating ourselves up, which is not what we want. We want to be like, oh, well, that wasn't the right thing for me. I'm going to move on to the next thing and try the next thing.
Yeah. And it comes down to as well, like, and you probably know this well, but like the growth mindset approach where we're looking at our strengths rather than our weaknesses, because that's what propels us forward. That's what keeps giving us momentum. That's what helps pick us up more often rather than focusing on everything we've done wrong, which is where the brain will bias and where the brain will go anyway.
Yeah.
I love what you said, about trying to pick up those wins all throughout the day, because you're constantly training your brain to be on the lookout for what's good and what's working and what's going to propel you forward. And ultimately, all of those micro habits, even though it might seem so small, so minute, over time, that's going to compound and that's going to accumulate. And that's just going to lead to further success in the future.
Yeah. It is interesting. And when you start to get that, like that mentality of thinking about like usually throughout my days, I'm like, ooh, what little thing am I going to, I like to, like when I don't have a very long list at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, wait, I got to be noticing more little wins. So like even little, I'm like, oh, well, this happened and that's a little win. Or sometimes like, if a patient cancels and then I'm able to make a phone call or something happen, like there's all these little things that I could look at as a negative, but I try to find some way to, and usually the more you're looking for a positive, usually you'll find one. So if you have that, if that's a habit you want to add, I highly recommend the wins at the end of the day. I found it to be a really, really, it's brought me a lot of joy and it's very fun. And it usually throughout the day, I'm like, ooh, that's a fun win. I can't wait to write that one down, or I can't wait to celebrate that. Or I love that what you talked about, like the little mini celebrations, like giving a high five or drum rolling on your desk, or it's just something to like bring that dopamine. But it's nice if you know that you have to like write it down, and this is why I think like therapy or a life coach or having someone hold you accountable, because you can be like, oh, I can't wait to tell that person about that. Or your partner, like, this little thing happened and I can't wait to tell them, because that's like, it just creates a little bit more joy and a little bit more excitement. And, all the little feelings, they add up to, like you said, they accumulate and they add up to big changes.
Absolutely. And that's ultimately, that's the secret of success.
Yes.
It's, tuning in to all those small things and doing those consistently. And soon you'll find that they become habits, and then you can move on to making other small changes. And, that's when you start to build over time. And like you said at the very start, things trickle down. And when you're doing kind of well in one sphere, so say you've really got on top of your sleep habits, that makes it easier to eat healthier. That makes it easier to manage your stress better. That makes it easier to exercise more. And they all kind of have a compound effect. And, that's only going to make you feel better in the long run.
Yeah. So this has been an awesome chat. Where can people find your work, or if you've got stuff out there in the world, what's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so I have a free 5-day video course if anyone is interested in that. That's at bitesizedhabit.co.
Awesome.
So .co. And that's just the evidence base behind habits. And it's a way to kickstart, that method for change. And I call that method for change sticky habits, if anyone's interested. And I also, like yourself, do a lot of speaking, as well. And so, I work out at drheatherspeaks.com for speaking as well. But the fast track way to start working on your habits, right? If today sparked any excitement or joy for you with your habits,
go
to bitesizedhabits.co. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, thank you. This has been an awesome conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully we can connect sometime in the future.
Amazing. Thank you for your time and your interest.
Oh yeah. Thanks guys. See you everyone next week.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to connect with me on social media and leave a rating and/or a review. This helps grow the show so more people have access to this knowledge that leads to empowered healing. Love and light, and see you next week.